Evening. So we have a lot to cover, and by way of introduction, to me it seems we're living in exceptionally challenging times. You see on many different levels contradictory messages given to parents through the print media and speakers. I try to avoid that pitfall myself. But what you notice is it's like a ping pong match. For a while, everyone's talking about unconditional love. Love your kids, hug your kids, look away, ignore everything, just love them, everything will be fine. Of course, there's always blowback. And then you get a few months in the mishpachas and the amis informing us that no, we need firm discipline, we need rules and structure, and whatever happened, and they lament the old days when kids listened, and we're all told off for being so permissive and instructed to be strong. Then of course it switches 3 months later, and this seems to go backwards and forwards. Part of the problem is not defining who we're talking about. But I think there's a broader issue of what exactly are we doing? We are living in different circumstances and times than was ever existed historically, with unique challenges for this generation. And frankly, I'm not sure that we're getting the guidance we need and how to do this properly. Everywhere, I see people struggling with trying to bring up today's kids. The bottom line is all kids do need rules, structure, and discipline. Without rules, structure, and discipline, we create anarchy. We do not create healthy citizens. The challenge is how do we create the rules, structure, and discipline our kids need without them rebelling from us? Without them at a very early age in life learning very quickly how to ignore us. How do we do that? It's all well and good to say they need a strong, firm discipline, but if that causes them to rebel, well, obviously that's not going to work. So yet again, we're confused, even though conceptually we know that's what we should be doing. If you add to this the attitude I've heard countless times leveled against the mental health profession, that it appears that the entire profession is excusing every kid, every child, we just find a new diagnosis to explain why they're misbehaving. So now, then there's no such thing as misbehaving anymore. There's no such thing as chutzpah. There's no such thing as any discipline because there's a diagnosis, hands off. Why is it that there's so much talk in the last 20 years or so about a variety of diagnoses that seem to keep emerging, new ones for the moment, of what exactly the problems with the kids are? What happened to the world that suddenly there's all these diagnoses, whereas 25 years ago and previous, they didn't exist? Where'd they all come from? How did the kids grow up before they had this? How did the world change that suddenly this is happening, that it appears these diagnoses are all over the place? What is going on in the world? The question is, how do we put all this together? How do we understand what's really going on and find the path down the middle where we can actually create healthy kids, nice citizens who are going to live in the world in a productive and healthy way while creating rules, structure, and discipline? How does all this work? How are we meant to do this? This is the subject for tonight. And at the same time, I'd like to see if I can explain, because I think it's crucial that we understand what exactly did change in the world. Because there's no sophic at all that the world of today, the parenting world of today, is totally not the parenting world of 25 years ago, perhaps not even of 10 years ago. When I was in Lakewood, it was quite common that after every Yontif, grandparents who came to town to spend time with their children and grandchildren left somewhat dismayed or devastated, watching the way their grandchildren were being brought up. It was so disappointing. Times change. And we have to understand what are the techniques, or what is the knowledge base with which we approach our parenting in order to bring up kids in this generation, because we surely need guidance and help. Let's start by understanding, how does normative parenting work? Ideally, this is what we're meant to do, and I personally believe if we were able to do this that I'm going to describe to everyone, if we could do this properly, then basically we're good to go. We're good to go. And this is what parenting is meant to look like. This is what it should be. It's really 3 distinct stages. The first stage is 0 to 2. Roughly. Please don't be alarmed on me. 0 to a year and 11 months of work too. But 0 to 2 conceptually. 0 to 2 is the stage of nurture, unconditional love. That means it doesn't matter what your child does. You have to communicate to your child that you are unconditionally loved. That's nurture. Doesn't matter what they do. That means, for example, if you're in a rush heading out to work in the morning and you're dressed and ready to go, and the last job you do before you leave the house is feeding Cheerios with milk to your 18-month-old, and you look that way for a minute, just a moment, while your kid dumps the entire bowl of Cheerios and milk on you, on your clothing, all over you, as you're in a rush to get out for work. Now, how are you meant to handle that? In nurture, you're meant to laugh. You're meant to laugh. You're meant to give an immediate message to your child that that's funny. I'm not angry with you. You didn't do something horrible and bad. Let me give you another example. Let's imagine that you finally convinced your husband to paint the salon. It needed painting for a long time. And finally got round to it and he painted the salon. He went off to Mincha. And as he comes back from Mincha Ma'ariv, it's not clear how this happened, but there was a red permanent marker left, uncapped, somewhere in reach of your toddler. And your toddler decided, this wall looks to me like a great opportunity for my early efforts at Picasso's. Let me see what I can do with this wall. And he comes home and here's this red marker all over the wall in the salon. How are you meant to react? What most people do is they evoke the Spanish Inquisition that second. Who left that pen out? What? Come look. And there's loud yelling and screaming and accusations around the house about this red pen and why weren't you watching the kid and how could this happen? What you're meant to do is take out your camera and take pictures. You're meant to take pictures. You will show them at his Sheva Brachas. And everyone will laugh and it'll be hilarious. What you're not meant to do is communicate to your child you did some evil deed. And that communication has to be not just what you say, it's your body language, it's your facial expression, it's your tone of voice. It's funny. If you go to a chasna and you've got a gown and it's a relative's chasna and the lady's wearing a gown and has the baby on her lap, unaware until you get out the car an hour later, that unfortunately those leak-proof diapers were not. And you get out and there's a huge stain on your clothing. Take pictures. It's inconvenient, I get that, but take pictures. But for heaven's sakes, don't communicate to your child that you've done something wrong, because they didn't. If anything, I did something wrong. I should have given them proper leak-proof diapers, or I should have made sure that the cap was on that red pen or it wasn't found, or I should have made sure I was watching the Cheerio bowl. A kid 0 to 2 can't do something wrong. And all this screaming and shouting and yelling, and the worst of all is the colicky kid. I mean, that's a challenge. You've got a kid with colic. You see, it starts off like this with a colicky kid. It starts off, and then it gets a little bit like this. And then it gets like this. And then you take the baby. No, you take the baby. These loud noises and sounds, there's solid research. This is not the place or time for it, but there's solid research about birth trauma and about traumas that happen to children within 6 months of birth because of things like this, where they pick up body language, tone of voice, facial expression that is not loving and warm. What children, all children need, this is the ideal I'm giving you. What all children need, all babies, 0 to 2, is they can do nothing wrong. Whatever they do, take out the camera and take a picture. It's funny. Laugh at it. Learn to be with the moment. Learn just to deal with it without getting frustrated and anger, because that frustration and anger, when it's communicated to your child, creates confusion and fear in your baby, in your little child, and prevents the second stage from working properly. Because if you do it properly, that means if you really do nurture the way you're meant to do nurture, that means you really tune in, and whatever they do, you just laugh, and it's funny, and it's cute, and you deal with it. Then when you reach the second stage, which is 2 to roughly, I would think today's day and age, 14, 15 max, somewhere between 2 to 15, maybe 16, depends on the home and the culture. But the next stage is limit setting. Stage 2, we as parents have to set limits on our children. Children want to explore the world. They have natural curiosity. Some of it is innocent. Some of it could be dangerous, like walking near a street. It could be dangerous. We as parents set limits. We set limits on everything, and we're meant to set limits. So if we've done the first stage properly, where 0 to 2, the child was zoicha to experience unconditional love. That means there is nothing verkehrt. Adarabah, you should understand the depth of it. The worse disaster that toddler creates, the better the opportunity you really have to set them up to be able to accept the limit setting in the second stage. Because, do you understand the lumdus? Because every time they misbehave or they do something that's really not misbehaving, every time they do something that upsets you, upsets the home, upsets whatever you're trying to do, and your response is loving and warm, so you nurture the child's neshama that they are precious to you and can do nothing wrong. Mimela, when you come along to the second stage and you start doing the limit setting, they can experience, they have the potential to experience the limit setting as a natural extension of what you've been doing for the first 2 years of their lives, which is unconditional love. So they kind of intuit that even though they hate having limits set upon them, but they kind of intuit that those limits must be for their good, because all they've ever experienced from you as a parent is loving nurture. So they can embrace the limit setting, and you can help them even though they don't like it. But a child who is zeicha to this, and there are some kids who are, they may be upset with you. You know this kind of child because they'll be upset with you if you have to put limits on them and say no supper tonight, or you got to go to bed because they did something they shouldn't have done, and you limit some behavior. And they may be mad with you tonight, but tomorrow morning when they wake up, they're in a great mood and they feel loved and cared for. They just know, they intuit it. They can stomp off to bed. That you're not going to stop because that's part of the limit setting. We expect that. But when they get that, it's not like, by the way, you stop loving them at 2. I hope I didn't, it's not like you stop there and never love them again. The loving goes forever. All I'm saying is 0 to 2, that's all you do. Then you start the limit setting, which you add on. It's built on a foundation of unconditional love. They're able to embrace it in a way that they somehow internally intuit this was a loving act, even though I don't like it. It must be a matara. There must be some benefit. And tomorrow morning, they will love you. And they will forget about this, and they will go forward. If we do that properly, then towards the upper teenage years starts the third stage of parenting, which is guidance, where they actually turn to us as parents because they trust us, and they turn to us for guidance. They want our input about which yeshiva to go to, or which seminary to go to, which camp to go to, eventually, which, yeshiva gedola, which shidduch, what career. They turn to us because the system worked. It was built in these stages, one on the other, where they look at us as loving, caring for them, setting limits, which was meant to be helpful to them. And then they turn to us for guidance. This is the ideal. Now, I won't do a show of hands how many people have done this. Let's not do that. Because I can tell you about myself, I didn't either. This is the ideal. This is what we're meant to do. What we need to come to terms with is what happens if we don't. See, occasionally we all get a kid or two with whom we can do this. Somehow their nature makes it easier. But most of the kids, we don't seem to do this properly. And we do get mad and upset with them. And they do pick up from our body language and our facial expression and our tone of voice, disappointment and frustration. And they do not get the natural nurture and love which they really need. So what happens to a kid if they don't get this? What happens if we're not able to do this system properly, which is what we should do? So two things. But the truth is, not much. The truth is, that's Klal Yisrael. Take a look around the streets. That's what we see. If you don't get enough of it, you kind of make it through, unless two other things affect your lives. And I think it's in this where we can understand what's really going on with our children and why we're struggling so much. We're going to understand it better in this generation. Because if these two things I'm going to describe don't really happen, then basically kids grow up, they become adults, they have their ups and downs, they have their moods, they have their struggles, they have the nisyonis, but they get on with life. And they do a pretty good job, and they basically do okay. Unless one of two things in this generation happens to our kids. The first is trauma. If trauma strikes, see, this drasha is about resilience. What we're talking about tonight is how do we create resilience? Resilience means the ability to bounce back. Doesn't mean we protect our kids from all the problems and issues in the world. That's inevitable. Things happen. Olam hanisayon, Mr. Shalom says. Nisyonis will happen. The question is, how do we create resilience in our kids so if they go through the struggles of life, they can bounce back? How do we do that? Problem is, first we have to understand what are the problems that affect our kids, and trauma is the first. Whether we like it or not, and we definitely do not like it, and we definitely do not like talking about it, and I'm definitely not going to talk about it tonight other than mention the facts, but the facts are the facts that whether we like it or not, 1 in 5 of our children experience sexual trauma in their childhood. Whether we like it or not, that's a fact. 20% of the kids will have some act or experience of sexual abuse in their childhood. This is, by the way, probably a conservative figure. Given that fact, for us as parents that fact alone, for us as parents not to have a model in our minds of how to create resilience in our children is just awful. We have no choice but to understand how to create resilience, because we know that one factor alone is 20% of the kids will be affected, of which half of them will tuck it away somehow and give an impression that I now call false resilience. And the false resilience, that means they'll get through and they'll stay frum and they'll look just fine. But when they get married, their problems kick in and they have all sorts of issues and problems and struggles in their marriage because of it. And the other 50% of the kids who get sexual abuse will count for the vast numbers of kids who are struggling going off the derech. So we have to understand this is about resilience, because if we don't do the nurture, limit setting, and guidance perfectly, then our kids are set up that when trauma happens, they will fall apart. There's another type of trauma that happens to our kids, learning trauma. Learning trauma is a fascinating thing. They actually do MRIs showing that there's a certain part of the brain lights up, just like sexual abuse victims, this part of the brain lights up, that they show kids with serious, genuine learning disabilities going through a primarily academic system for 12 years end up traumatized. They end up traumatized. So they are reacting. I can explain what's the problem with trauma in a moment. And there's a third set of trauma, which I call de facto learning disabilities, because that's really everything. It's all other sorrows and problems and issues that children are dealing with, whether they're health-related, financially related, culturally related. There's so many causes and sources of why kids are struggling with just getting through the day. And for a kid to be struggling with issues simply just to get through the day, how can they be an academic success in our system the way we have it today if their head is full of problems and sorrows? How are they going to do it? How are they going to be able to have a high level of academic success if their mind is full of sorrows? And those I call the de facto learning disabilities. It's not a learning disability, but it simply disables them from learning. These children, all these type of children, are effectively traumatized. They experience trauma, and this is what trauma is. Trauma is defined, you see, by the diagnosis, PTSD. I'm not going to get too detailed tonight, but just the facts. Is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in the diagnostic criteria in the book says as follows. Listen to this and think about a reactive kid who's struggling and always like, the best word is they freak out. They just lose it. They just can't stay focused. They have a severe psychological reaction at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the original trauma. That's PTSD, and that's what happens to trauma victims. So if we've not supplied the proper nurture limits, which led to limit setting, then guess what? Unfortunately, the children experience life as threatening. And the very threatening nature of life, because they don't understand, they're little kids, and their experience is of us being upset with them, frustrated with them, disappointed with them, angry with them, and they're really not sure why. They're little things. They really don't understand what it is. And Mamela, by the time we get to the limit setting, they already don't trust us. And what this leads to is the second issue that our kids are facing, which in global terms I'm going to describe as something we in the field call an attachment disorder. And this is really important to understand. See, for the children to do well in life, for all people, human beings, all of us, to do well in life, we have to develop what are considered good attachments. We have to attach well. We are social beings. We live in a social environment. We don't live on a desert island somewhere. We interact with other people, whether it's with children, with siblings, whether it's with a spouse, a boss, employees, at work, yeshiva, friends. We're social beings, and we have to work out how to attach well in a healthy way to other people. That means we do not feel threatened by other people. We don't find people scary. We don't find relationships threatening. On the contrary, we're open-minded to embrace and accept that relationships are essentially very, very nice, and people are very, very nice. And it's only if I find out they're not. So, okay, so now I know they're not. But until then, I assume they're nice, they're good, people are good. Children who go through the early experiences without having the unconditional love, without having that nurture 0 to 2, and then go into the limit setting which they experience now, unfortunately, as threatening, as threatening can actually experience their own parents as threatening to them. They're scared. Kids tell me, kaseda ukaseda, how I had to run and hide when one of my parents came into the house, where I was nervous. I felt the tension around the Shabbos table that something was going to happen. Someone was going to say something. I felt like I had to stay controlled because I don't know what's going to happen next. A nervous tension of fear, unknown, undefined, unrelated to anything specific. That's an attachment disorder. And when, like I said, when the limit setting stage is not built in a healthy way firmly on the nurture stage, so children experience life as threatening. So these two issues, that children facing trauma and children experiencing what is essentially attachment disorder, accounts for the struggles of so many of our children. And later on, of course, in therapy, it all comes out and we start working through what they're dealing with and why they're having such a hard time in the system. Now hold this thought for a minute. Just hold all that. That's the background. Just hold that. Let's have a line. Just put that on hold. I'd like to address a second issue, and then we'll see how they dovetail together. And if anyone wants to stay, I'll then explain what we're meant to do. I hope I'm not depressing everyone, but I just want to make the case. I am. Got it. Okay. I promise you at the end, it'll be good. It'll all work out good. I wouldn't do this unless I had the answer. But no, I work with children all the time. I work with teenagers. And I hear where they're at. And all I'm doing right now is simply describing what pours out in the office. This is what they describe. This is not research. This is anecdotal. This is what actually happens, and this is what kids actually say. This is how they felt. Now that wouldn't be so bad 25 to 50 years ago. But I'm going to draw a line and explain why in this day and age it's impossible. These problems create basically an impossible life for a child. The question I asked at the beginning was all these diagnoses, what happened? People have a kasha. You know, when I was a child, people always start with this line. When I was a child, and they proceed to tell me how perfect the world was. I have a kasha if that's true, by the way. But compared to the world we live in, I understand what they're saying to me. I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, we grew up in Britain, Great Britain. And in Great Britain in those days, when we were children, now we're going back over 50 years, 55, 60 years, in those days, when children sat at a table to have a meal with their family, if you wanted to be excused, like to go to the bathroom or anything else, you asked, "Please, mummy darling, may I leave the table?" You did not get off your chair without asking rishus. And if you budged, Daddy, not so darling, gave you a look fit to kill, and you sat rooted on your chair. You didn't move. When we went to school, there were no school buses in those days. You went on a public school bus, and you wore school uniform. If you were seen on a school bus by any of the staff of the school not giving your seat to someone older than you, you got a detention. Try that today. Try that with your kids at the table. "Please, mummy, darling, may I leave the table?" Today, it comes to benching, and they have to send out the FBI to find out where are the kids. One of them is asleep, that's for sure. One went to sleep. One is missing in action. They're probably by a neighbor. They're down the block. They've gone. They're just gone. They're just not there. There's a few playing games. One's reading on a couch upside down in the corner of a room somewhere. You have to gather the troops just to bench. In the world we grew up in, you sat at the table from beginning to the end of the meal, and if you were excused, you came right back. There was no such thing. You do that today to your kids, they'll all be psychotic. Someone said it's true. It is true. We grew up in a world where you walked, I used to give workshops. I'll give you an example. In schools, I did a load of chinuch workshops over the years. So I go into schools to speak to the teachers, the staff, about working with today's children. I used to, 15, 20 years ago, I'd walk into a school, I'd open the door. I didn't have to open the door, excuse me. A kid would see me and open the door very politely and say, "Can I help you?" And I'd say, "Yes, I'm looking for whatever." They say, let me show you. And they would lead you to the place and show you where you had to go. Today, this happened to me recently in New York. I opened a school the door, and about 6 kids knocked me off my feet as they charged in under my arm. They didn't even thank me for opening the door for them. Something changed. The world changed. We'd walk down a corridor in a school, and if a teacher walked past, you had to lower your voice or get a detention. If the headmaster walked past, you had to actually lower your eyes. You couldn't do eye contact or you got a detention. What happened to that world? If I had a few hours, I'd go through this in detail, but I just want to make the case. What happened to that world is there was once upon a time, up until probably, I'm guessing, somewhere in the 50s, the 1950s, up until then, there was a firm lid on society, and that lid I call deference to elders. There was a lid, deference to elders, respect to older people. There was just a lid. It was like, that was life. The nature of the world was such that children gave respect to older people. With the advent of television, I'll do this very quickly for you just to make my case. With the advent of television wasn't, when television was osser, it was osser right away, of course, right? It wasn't the content that's osser. It was, what was really bad about television is who watched television? Children. Adults used television to babysit their kids. And corporate America chapped in 2 minutes. This is a vehicle for advertising. So guess what? They created programs to make kids watch in order that you'd watch the commercials. The whole point is to watch the commercials. Well, who were they making the commercials to in the early days of television? Children. So suddenly children became consumers. See, in the early days when we were children, we never went shopping. There was no such concept as a child going shopping. You might be dragged to a store by your mother or your father, you might be. Most likely, they bought what you needed and it was just in the drawer or in your closet. You didn't actually go shopping. There was no concept of go. You weren't a consumer as a child. TV changed that and started a process that has moved through the last 50 years, and it's created something called equalization of status, where children feel internally equal in status to us, to adults. They know they're missing car keys, but that's only temporary. Once they're about 12, that changes. They're missing money and credit cards, and that's about it. And most of them I even see little kids with credit cards today. Cell phones in this country, every little kid's got a cell phone. It's like mind-boggling. You see, the equalization of status that started with TV then went through the Vietnam War. And when Vietnam War, at the end of the war, when students in America, 18, 19, 20-year-old students stood up to the federal government, National Guard was called in, and they had to negotiate with kids, equalize the status of children. Technology changed the world to an equalized status. When we were kids, my father had a stereo system. We dare not touch that. It was his. You could ask him, to play something, but you didn't actually, he had to get reshus to press a button on it. It was the family stereo. There was no such thing as you touching it. But technology found a way to market to children. So everything became small. The Walkman, remember Walkman? That was like the first time they had this thing where they could shut us out. That was the point of Walkman, shut your parents out. And they could walk around the whole time with this thing on their ears, shutting us out. Of course, we all know where that's gone today, with the I this and the I that and the I, and you get lost. Everything's about me. It's the I everything. Technology joined the experience of equalization of status. And the worst it became, the worst I saw of this, which I understood, but it was just unfortunate in its application. I understood why. It made sense why. But the application was abysmal, was when schools were required to put up 800 numbers, toll-free numbers for abuse lines where you could report someone abusing you. And where kids now started threatening parents and teachers and Rebbeim, I'm going to report you if you do that. And by that time, this lid of deference to elders was gone. It was gone. There was no lid anymore. There is no natural status. It's the unusual child, not the regular child. The unusual child today has a natural affinity. I have 8 kids. One of them used to stand up. Every time I walked in the room, I said, "What's wrong with you?" The world changed when that lid came off. And prior to that lid coming off, all these disorders, the ADDs, the ODDs, the OCDs, everything, it all existed before. But when that lid was on society, where you had to comply with social norms, there was an expectation that was societal. It was nothing to do with religion, it was nothing to do with us, it was nothing to do with where you lived. It was worldwide. There was a societal, conventional agreement that children gave respect to parents. When that lid left, and it'll never come back, it's gone. When that lid came off society, and by now it's off, it's firmly off. It's not even like clipped on and hanging on the other side. It's off. All these disorders, all these problems children were dealing with, they could no longer hold it together. And so flooded out all these problems that we started recognizing these problems and giving them diagnostic criteria, which we'd really not seen before because they were able to hold it together. And now they can't. And unfortunately, these poor kids who live in a world where we haven't yet adjusted to this reality, where our expectations for most of us are false. When you give birth and you have a little baby, by your kiddush, you have a little girl, right? You know she's really Sarah Schneider, right? You know that, right? It's interesting how we all thought we got her. Like, how do we all have that dream, I got Sarah Schneider here, And by the bris, it's for sure the Briskerov, Or if you're Hasidish, Baal Shem Tov. I got a neshama. We all thought we got that neshama. Little did we know. It would be much more convenient if they came out with a tag on their toe saying ADD, ODD, let us know what we're dealing with at least. That would be more convenient. But the fantasy, do you understand the combination of false expectations with a reality that lid is gone, the problems emerge, trauma is everywhere, and guess what? We unwittingly created attachment disorder with our own children because of all this, where they don't feel connected to us properly. Did someone say ouch? Okay, I'm going to say it. Ouch. Take questions afterwards, if that's all right. Years ago, so we started talking about the OTD, the off the derech. It's passé, you're not allowed to say anymore. I think kids in crisis, kids struggling, kids in pain. OTD is like not politically correct. It came from sar min derech, off the derech. That's where it came from. Anyway, OTD. We then moved to OOD, which is off our derech. Actually, they're very spiritual. They just don't want to be yeshivish. But they run to Breslev, they run to Kalbach, they're looking for something spiritual. They're off our derech, they're on their derech. Trust me, a very meaningful derech. But I want to introduce two new ones. And these are all over the place because of what I'm describing tonight. They're all over the place. They are ONTDU and ONTDD. They are on the derech uninspired and on the derech disillusioned. Both these two groups, they wear the jacket, the hat, they got the clothing, they got the whole, the girls have the sneers thing going more or less. The boys have definitely got the Italian shoes, if possible. They've definitely got the white shirts, cotton, no iron cotton shirt. The hat is you see a ONTDU buying a hat. It's agonizing to watch him. I go buy a hat, it takes me about 3 minutes. It's a hat, what is it after all? Okay. If you're ONTDU, they'll spend an hour trying to work out the brim, they've got to get 5 mirrors around so you can see it from every angle. It's where halacha in ONTDU, on the derech uninspired, yeah, okay, as long as it's not in the way, I'm okay with it, no problem. ONTDD, on the derech disillusioned, is like, I think it's a Yesh Omrim, forget that one. Anyway, Ma'av's Rishus, isn't it? Okay, we're Potter, we're done. It's where the externals, we see a world of children growing up where Sof Zman Kriya Shema may be during Zman, but not Ben Azmanim. Ben Azmanim, leave me alone, I'm going to sleep, I'm on vacation. It's amazing how the whole levush and outside is there, but the whole pneumius is missing. That's attachment disorder. What you're looking at is an attachment disorder. They're not attached. They didn't attach to us. Umimela, they didn't attach to Kudsha Brichel. That is an attachment disorder you're looking at, where they go through and they seem to be okay, but something is fundamentally missing. This is the world we live in today. This is the truth. And everyone knows this. We just don't like to acknowledge it and be honest about it. And it's all resolvable. We can deal with this, but we need some new, fresh ideas how to deal with this. What am I meant to speak till? Can someone tell me? Whatever. Okay. I'll be honest. No, I'll be honest with you. I always prefer to be short and leave you wanting more than the other way around. Like wishing, wouldn't he stop already, The question is resilience. That's the subject of tonight. How do we create resilience in our children? And resilience is the word. It has to be the key word in all our families. Are we creating resilience? Are we developing in our children the ability to cope with all of this? The school systems, and I'm not knocking it, I work with the school systems throughout the world, so please understand what I'm saying to you. But the school systems need a major shake-up. Our school systems are primarily focused, ruba de ruba, and I'm talking about worldwide. I'm not saying this school or this yeshiva or this community. I'm saying worldwide in our Haredi world. The school systems are primarily focused on what's called Bali Kishron and Metzionim. It's like the top 15% is all that really counts, and everybody else is struggling to keep up with it. Most kids need tutoring, extra tutoring, meds, behavioral modification, special ed, learning, tutors, mentors, punishment and rewards, just to get them to basically comply with basic school. That's a crime. That would be a crime even if we didn't have attachment disorders. Even if the kids weren't attachment disorders. So what happens is that most parents are defensive parenting. That means we're parenting to keep our kids in school. We're actually not parenting as Chazal taught us, Chanei Chana Pidakoi. We're not actually focused on what's the needs of the kid. What we're desperate about is how do we keep them in school? How do we keep them in the system? How do we keep them with the program? And the moves we make are designed primarily to keep them with the system. That's wrong. The system has to shift to the middle, has to shift to the average kid, where the average kid is entitled to academic excellence. It has to shift where kids feel as close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when they graduate as they did in primary. Because in primary, they loved Hashem. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, everything's Hashem, Hashem. Right? They come home and they're so in love with Hashem, right? They're magic at your Shabbos table. Same kid in 12th grade. It's a miracle if they even know who Hashem is. What's Hashem got to do with it? Academia comes in, Hashem steps out. This is the world they're living in. Take all these things I'm saying together and you understand these poor kids, the struggle they have is a nightmare. It's a really challenging life for them. And it's their life. It's their whole life. So how do we adjust to this? What do we do? So here's the formula. Here's the formula. And the formula, essentially in the last year or two, this is all I want to talk about, because I see the way the world is resonating to this. It's a simple formula. I'm talking about it everywhere, and everybody is trying to do it because this is the way to do it, and it works. It's what I call the 4 S's. The 4 S's. I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll explain them. And they are safe, secure, seen, and soothed. S-O-O-T-H-E-D. Soothed. Safe. Let's take safety. Kids are entitled to feel safe. We have to focus in our lives to make sure our children feel safe. There are 5 types of abuse that can happen to children. Physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, and spiritual. 5 types of abuse. Unwittingly, we can commit these things without realizing. Punishing a kid too much and too hard for something they don't really comprehend they did can be physical abuse. I heard at one of the previous Aguda conventions, it was such a wonderful line. I wish I'd said it. I was actually jealous when I heard it. It was so clever. I think it was Rav Nosson Sherman said this amazing line. I'm telling you, just, yesterday's discipline is today's abuse. And he was so right. Of course, it's not everything, but it's so right conceptually. We have to be very careful that we're not falling back on yesterday's discipline, punishing our kids, because in this world, that's abuse. Kids have to feel safe, and I can tell you that many of them don't. They have to feel safe, that we're not going to degrade them by announcing, thinking we're motivating them, and letting them know that you're never going to make a good father like that. You think you're going to have children one day the way you behave? You're so lazy. You think you can be successful? You got to push. You got to push hard. You'll never be successful. See, and years ago, those kind of statements were perhaps, possibly motivational. Today, they're destructive. They do not create safety. Ideally, it'll be wonderful if we can get rid of all homework. Get rid of all, wouldn't it be nice if children will feel safe to go home and just sit with mommy and have some cookies and cake and milk or whatever they have today? And not have to worry about this incredibly unsafe, stressful night of trying to force everyone to get their homework done and go to clubs and this and that and the other and be driven in every direction for mentoring and tutoring and who knows what. And the whole night is a stressful night. They have to be safe to go home to relax. Halavai, we get rid of homework. It's abusive. By the way, on that subject, so are Parsha sheets. Parsha sheets. You know how many kids are terrified? We've destroyed Shabbos because you only need one kid in your family. You destroyed Shabbos because of the Parsha sheets. Because they're terrified. We used to have a system in the family where I let the youngest in the family, because they love Parsha sheets, right? The kid in primary or first, they just love their Parsha sheet, and they know everything. They know midrashim I didn't know were written yet. It's unbelievable. Where their teachers come up with these midrashim is mind-boggling to me. But they do. They should all be in Brisk, these girls. I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. But they come up with stuff. The little one, we had a system. We only did the youngest child's parsha sheet, and then you went up through the ages of the children, offering anyone who felt like it to add something. And if you don't want to, that's fine. You don't have to. We just move on. We only did the youngest because I saw what was going on. By the way, my Rebbe, Matisel Solomon Shlita, my Rebbe, Shafu Shalema, he was adamant against homework and parsha sheets because he felt it was ruining families. Where's your pleasant, joyful Shabbos meal when the kids are terrified and shown up for not knowing something? And then you get all proud of one. What does that mean to the other one who you weren't all proud of, who didn't get it? We have to make children feel safe in our homes, where they can come home and predictably feel safe. We live in a safe environment where we don't, as husbands and wives, bark at each other that scares the kids, that we work tremendously, tremendously hard in our sholem bayis, that we should always be loving and warm to each other, always. And if we have difficulties, deal with it privately. Kids need to feel safe in the home if they're going to attach to us. Do you see that? Otherwise, they're not going to attach. On the contrary, the kid will be the one that physically or conceptually is hiding behind the couch because they're scared of you. That's an attachment disorder. And then, of course, there's no resilience. We have to make sure we do our utmost to learn. If 20% of children get sexually abused, then every parent in this day and age is mechuyev to learn about sexual abuse. Find out what it is, because it happens to 20% of kids. And it's so unbelievably destructive. So we have to find out. We can't put our heads in the sand anymore. We can't be afraid. I was invited one time, I'm not going to say where, but they invited me to a very famous Haredi community in a certain place, which I'm being careful not to say. And they met me at the airport. It was in a foreign country. And the shliach of the airport was there to make sure, Rabbi Shimon, do you think when you give this drasha, you could do it without saying the word sexual abuse? It was a drasha on sexual abuse prevention. I deliberately said it 42 times. And I made the observation, as I did it, and I understood them. I wasn't trying to mock them, but I understood them, that the very fact they had to send someone to the airport to try and convince me not to say the words is part of the problem. We have to get our heads out of the sand. Our kids are not safe unless we learn something about this sugya. And we're all mechuyev to learn today. There is no excuse for any parent with children not to learn the sugya, the basic sugya of sexual abuse. If you want to, and you're able to, you could go online and type in Rabbi Shimon Russell, Manchester. They taped it and someone put it online, and I give a comprehensive discussion of the sugya, and you can learn everything you need to know about that sugya. You could learn it there. And you're mechuyev to learn something. We have to make our children safe. We can't be foolish anymore. We must. We have to watch out for spiritual abuse in the home. You know how spiritual abuse happens? It's when we'll give a great drasha at the Shabbos table about tzedakah, some brilliant, with mashalim and stories. Then the mashulach comes to the door and someone says, shh. Shh. Okay, they left. Okay. We can't be hypocrites. We have to, if we're going to talk and darshan, we Jews, we're great at darshaning. Did you notice? We're fabulous about darshaning. We're just not quite as good at living the way we darshan. We have to live consistently with our drashas so that we don't commit spiritual abuse. We have to actively model for our children the values that we hope they're going to have. Because if we don't, that confusion makes them unsafe. The first of the 4 S's is safe. We have to create safety. And it goes without saying, locked doors and windows and driving cars extremely, extremely respectfully and carefully are included in making children feel safe. How many kids did I hear from who told me that they didn't feel safe with their parents? I asked them, the first thing they told me, I never felt safe driving with her or him. First thing they said. All these different aspects of safety we have to pay attention to, because if we don't, then the kids don't attach to us properly if they don't feel safe with us, and they end up with an attachment disorder. You have an attachment disorder, you don't have resilience. If you don't have resilience, then you face all these problems that will destroy and undermine your life. The second is soothe. Secure. Second is secure. Secure means, again, security is, I have a confidence as a child that my Shabbos table is a pleasant one. It's not a place where I have a suffix if it's going to be friendly or warm or scary. I'm not sure what's going to go down. Will everything be like comfortable? I have to know it's going to be a happy place. I have to be secure my home is a happy place. I have to be secure that if my parents say something, they live up to their word. If they say, yes, we're going on vacation, we go on vacation. If they say we're doing something, we do it. They have to feel secure in their parents' marriage. Probably the greatest gift we ever give our children is the love we give to our spouse. It's probably the greatest gift. It creates that security in a child's heart. If you can, and it goes, by the way, it's not just husband and wife. It's relationships. Kids model on relationships. So they see parents relating to other people with warmth and kindness creates security. Between friends, the way we interact with the children, the way we deal with their temper tantrums, the way we deal with the 0 to 2 creates that security in our children. They have to be secure that they get the appropriate clothing in the right season and that their tuitions are going to be paid. And if you're struggling financially, kids should not know about it. That doesn't mean you have to buy them everything and go into debt. That's ridiculous. It's perfectly reasonable to say to a child, that's not in our budget. That's not a priority for us. Therefore, it's not in the budget. That's fine. But what you can't do is run around saying, where do you think the money comes from? You think it grows on trees? We think we're rich? You can't do that stuff. Not in this day. And again, maybe there was a world once where you could get away with it. I'm not saying it was ever advisable. But in this world, you can't get away with that. Kids have to feel secure. And if finances are tight, then it's not in the budget. Not now. Maybe it will be. I'll let you know. Come back to me in 3 months, in 6 months. We'll talk about it. Is there an alternative? Is there another option? But what you can't do is make this like deer in the headlights fright. And what do you think? You think, Tadi's learning in Koilel. Don't ever do that one. That's like nightmare. What? I've seen studies that were done. No one would ever publish this. It was thrown away immediately. I was involved in one of them where all the kids whose fathers were working by 12th grade by 8th grade said they wanted to be in Koilel. And all the kids in Koilel by 8th grade said they want to be working. If we're struggling with whatever it is, kids are entitled to feel secure in our environment, secure in our life, our family. We know what we're doing as a family. We have a structure, we have a philosophy, we have a certain belief about who we are and how we do things, and we communicate and pass that on to our children so they feel secure. They feel secure with the hamshacha of life, that life has a direction, that we know we're going in a direction. And not when we have, unfortunately, one child that's struggling, that's half off the derech or off the derech, and we walk around. The worst thing is those candles, Friday night, bawling your head off, begging Hashem, like literally you're sitting there. The kids can't watch this. If you've got to do that, do it privately. Let the kids see, I'm secure and confident. Hashem gave us these challenges. We will deal with these challenges. Don't let the kids see you walking around like death warmed up. And definitely cut out the long crying, bitter Tehillim. You know, the kids can't see this stuff. It's not fair. They have to feel it doesn't matter. We will help him or we will help her. I don't know how and I don't know when, but we don't give up on a kid. They need to hear a confident voice. They need to be secure because they may go through their own problems. And they need to be secure that if you deal with that older sibling and you love them and you care for them and you're there for them, that creates security that even if I go through it, you'll be there for me too. It creates attachment. Do you see that? And the alternative creates detachment. And resilience is built around detachment. It's pashut. Safe and secure. Seen. Children absolutely deserve to be seen. What does seen mean? So we all have this line that if you don't, if you give it like an authentic parenting drasha in the frum world, at some point you're meant to raise your voice and go like this and say, "Chanech lana pidarkai." No one actually knows what that means or how to do it. No one ever told anyone. How am I meant to work out what darko is anyway? Like, what's the chance of a husband and wife agreeing, even if you think? Right, you've got 8 kids, so you've probably got 16 darkos going on there. You could have a team of psychologists, and they'll still not work out what darko is. So exactly what are you meant to do? So we all give up. And instead of that, it's like, get the kids in the bath, get the kids to bed, get the kids in the car, get the kids. It's always the kids. It's like this group of people called kids. And we're doing this thing with the kids. Whoever they are, it's them or us. It's crazy. Kids are unique. Each one, take a look at any family, those same 8 kids where they're grown up and married. The youngest got married, so the youngest is 23, and the oldest is about 43. About a 20-year span, right, between the oldest and the youngest. And you look at 8 mishpachas, they're all different. It's unbelievable. You got 8, the flavors, the culture, the way they express their lives, the talents were unique, and it's all different. They're 8 completely different kids. 8 different mishpachas, bringing up 8 different sets of grandchildren. This is the way Hashem made it. And yet it's the kids, get the kids, the kids. It's all rubbish. We have to work out how to see our kids, how to reflect back to our children their uniqueness. It's so interesting, isn't it? We're so good at reflecting back at them everything wrong with them. That we have no problem with, telling them all their faults. That's crazy. We have to go out of our way to see our children, to see their milas, to see their uniqueness, to see what's special about them, and to celebrate what is special about our children, whether it's their learning or their musical talent or their chesed or their cake baking ability, whatever it is. Everyone's got something special. Every child. It is our job. That's actually what chinuch is. Chanoich lana, chinuch is really about that, showing them what's special about them. See, there's 2 words for teaching. There's a melamed, there's a melamed, and there's a mechanech, right? There's limud and there's chinuch. What's a melamed? Melamed is about installation. A mechanech is about extraction. A melamed is melamed. They install information in the brain of the child that the child didn't have before. They don't know the ice of Rashi. They don't know nakudas. They don't know things. So a wise melamed, or melamedes, installs cleverly the information in the brain of a child. That's a melamed. That's what we send them to school for. We are meant to be mechanchim. We are meant to be chanoich lena pidaka. We're meant to be mechanech. What is mechanech? So I found Ka'ain, what I'm about to tell you, in the Chovos HaTalmidim says almost the same word, a little bit different, but he says almost the same thing. You see, when you take an example, you make a Chanukah Sabayis. What is a Chanukah Sabayis? Well, you show off your house? You get all the neighbors in so they're all like jealous? No. Chanukah Sabayis is where you dedicate with your friends and family your house for the potential. The Kodesh Baruch Hu gave me this beautiful home, and I'm going to dedicate my home to the potential of what I can do with this home. I'll make a Shabbos, a Yontef, bring up a family, do chesed, make simchas. There's a lot I can do in my home. I'm dedicating the potential that exists in the future of this home. That's chinuch. That's a Chanukas Abayis. In a similar vein, a mechanech is a person who can extract from a child their uniqueness, what's so special about them, their God-given talents that Hashem gebenched them with, and show it to them. Let them see what's special about them. They're little kids growing up. They don't know. We are mechanchim. That's chanoichna pidarkai. That's exactly and only possible if it is darkai. Not as one chacham once said to me, no, Rabbi Rashi, you got it all wrong. Chanoich lana pidarkai. The vav of darkai goes on the father. Chanoich lana pidarkai shala'av. Go figure. It can only be darkai because it's his uniqueness and her uniqueness. It's their God-given special talents. We have to extract that out of the kid and then show it to them. That's seen. We have to see a child's great deeds. We have to observe and notice their goodness and reflect it back to them. They have to be seen for who they are, not constantly seen as a disappointment because they're not fulfilling what we wished they were. We have to see the truth. We have to be willing to see that truth and reflect it back to them. They are all God-given, perfect creatures. It's our job to reflect back their uniqueness. That's seen. And finally, soothed. How many children, when they're little, give you an example, just understand the marshal. So the little kid somehow gets on to their bigger siblings' tricycle and fall right off and bruise their knee or scrape themselves or bash themselves on the head. And the first thing that happens is, again, the Spanish Inquisition. Who left the tricycle out? You weren't watching. Why weren't you watching? What was going on? You know, when we were kids, it worked. You see, when we got hit at school, if we got hit by a teacher, you dare not tell your father, because right away he hit you because you got hit. You got hit? Bam! They'll teach you. That was totally normal in the worlds we grew up in. We have to work out how the first reaction to anything and everything that disturbs and hurts our children's lives is the first thing we do is soothe them. First thing, you stick them on the knee and you soothe their pain. Even if they're a teenager, you soothe their pain. Even if it's partial to you, they brought the whole thing on themselves. You don't start off with, didn't I tell you? I warned you. Like, what were you thinking? Right? We all do it. We warn them, we beg them, we threaten them, nechtegetug, they go out and do whatever they want, and then they come back complaining that they got in trouble. Like, I warned you, do your homework, for heaven's sakes, right? And then they get a lousy mark and they complain. Did you study? Like, hello? First, in this generation, in this world where that lid is gone, the first thing we do is soothe them. That must be very hard for you. If you don't know about empathic listening, learn it. Just learn it. Learn how to listen with empathy. That must be very difficult for. I hate my teacher, I hate my friend, I hate everything. I see you really hate your friend, you hate your teacher, I hear that. That must be really hard for you. Yeah, I hate, and just repeat it all back to them. Just learn empathic listening. Soothe them. If they did something and it's so clear to us, they brought it on themselves, they caused the problem themselves, leave that for later. Our children are entitled, and they desperately need us to connect with them first. Connect with their tsar. Ima anochi b'tzara. I'm with you, I feel your pain. And do it authentically and genuinely and connect later on, maybe the next day. What's the rush for the Musa Drasha? It doesn't make any sense. You think they're really interested in your Musa Drasha? First of all, they know they're stupid. If you do it properly, they come back to you and they tell you, oh, I was so stupid, why did I do that? Say, listen, there are choices, you make choices, you know, it might have worked. Yeah, but it wasn't going to work. They tell you the whole Musa Drasha. You don't have to tell them anything, they're not stupid. What they need, though, is to be attached to you. So when they make a mistake, when they mess up, when they cause harm to themselves, they can predictably rely on a soothing, smiling, warm, accepting, loving parent, accepting them, connecting with them first. Leave the chinuch to later. Leave the musa to later. Not now. First we've got to soothe. Now in this generation where that lid is gone, in this generation where all these disorders have emerged, where trauma is a reality, where we have a system that actually traumatizes, half our kids. If you ask the average, I've asked kids, you ask the average 12th grade graduating kid, which of these, I'm not going to answer this, but let's dialogue paramiza. But you ask the average kid, which of these three statements best fits your school experience? Kid who just graduated 12th grade. You ask them, which one best fits you? A, I had an amazing experience. School was incredible. I'm going to miss it. I really grew from school. B, I'm simply glad it's over. 3, I hated it. Turns out that, I'm going to say it because I hope it's true, more than I think it is true, that 15% at most say the first kind of statement, something that sounds like that, 10 to 15%. If this was a business, it would be a disaster. The 85% of the kids come in those other two groups is a disaster. That's the world they live in. And then trauma happens, and the lid's gone, and we got false expectations on them. And we didn't give them nurture, limit setting, and guidance properly, because we didn't know. And we couldn't. And they're all alone in a little world of pain, struggling, feeling very detached to us. And they are unresilient unless we do these 4 S's. If you do these 4 S's in your home, and you can do it at any point, you do it preventive with your little ones, you can do it with your struggling kids, it's probably the primary thing you have to do if you have a kid who's off the derech, who's struggling, to bring them back. Give them the 4 S's. Lavish doses of the 4 S's. Keep it in your mind every second. Because the 4 S's create resilience by creating attachment to us. Because attachment is resilience. That's where it happens. And so if they go through the struggles and difficulties of life, we've inoculated them. This is the vaccine, the 4 S's. Children who have the 4 S's know how to relate. They know how to be dan lekafschus. They know how to look at parents, adults, teachers, rebbes who are having a hard day and put it in perspective and not be mad about it. They know how to experience school and life in a nice way because they don't feel threatened by life. And ultimately, you've done the most important thing. And I'll leave you with this, which is, why is parenting so important? Because ultimately, our job in this world is dovka ba, is to create a relationship with Rabbeinu Shalom. We're meant to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's our job. That's what we're trying to do, is bring up children who will connect to Hashem. This is our job. He is Av HaRachamon. So isn't the metaphor perfect that if we as parents create proper attachment to us through the 4 S's, that our children will be able to take that experience of healthy attachment to us, who is the Av HaRachamon in this world, and transfer it to the Av HaRachamon in Yena world, in Shemayim, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They can transfer the experience of the Av HaRachamon, the Eim HaRachamon, transfer that to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the tachlis of the whole process. The 4 S's is the vehicle. We have to come to terms with the change in the world, as I described. Use the 4 S's, all the Eibush to help, and that we should all be matzliach. Thank you very much.